Okay, so good evening. What are 24 hours in the NRL? Two coaches in the same day. I can't remember the last time that happened. Michael Maguire, time has finally run out for Michael Maguire at the West Tigers. Sorry state of affairs, to be fair. To be brutally honest, with the West Tigers. Halfway through his fourth season, only 2 wins out of 13 games, or 13 rounds because they had a bye week. The team never really recovered from that heavy, embarrassing defeat against the Canterbury Bulldogs, the Wooden Spoonists, at the end of last season. Never fully recovered. They never got going. The writing's been on the wall for Michael Maguire since last season. I would say about halfway, 3/4 of the way through. The Tales of Tiger Town, I think, was the moment that you could definitely tell that time had definitely expired for Michael Maguire. The fact that they should have parted ways at the end of last season. That Tales of Tiger Town documentary was a terrible decision made by the board to make that documentary. Fly on the Wall series. A lot of sports teams do it. I'm not a massive fan necessarily of the format. I have watched like various Fly on the Wall documentary series involving professional sport, but as soon as that series ended and the bubble was in place in Queensland, the season was already. They were already struggling last season, and it got progressively worse, culminating in that heavy defeat on the last game of the season to the Bulldogs, the Wooden Spoonists, who were miles behind the rest of the competition by that point. They never got started this season. The 2 wins so far. But I think it's not Michael Maguire's fault that the team are where they are. This has been a decade plus of mismanagement in the boardroom, with a mismanagement of the salary cap, a mismanagement of the youth system and the reserve grade sides that feed talent through to the first grade. Talent retention has been a problem. They've lost Josh Addo-Carr, Ryan Pappenhausen, Mitch Moses, just to name a handful of players who have played for the West Tigers. And it's a dual venture club as well. So the criticism of the dual venture model not being entirely successful is a concern. And the difference between the St George Illawarra Dragons and the West Tigers is both Balmain and especially Western Suburbs, the Magpies, were basically bankrupt when they merged together. They had no financial stability, especially the Western Suburb Magpies for the best part of 15 years. They had been on life support by the time the merger takes place. And so the finances and the financial management as well, there's been times where the finances have been brought into question. I haven't even got to Nathan Brown deciding to basically retire himself from frontline coaching as well with the New Zealand Warriors, which is another club that is again in a complete and utter mess over the same period of time. The West Tigers situation reminds me of English football with Manchester United, where the former coach, Tim Sheens, the successful coach, is being brought back in. He's lingering around. He's in charge of recruitment and salary cap and roster management. But in reality, how much say does he actually have on the selection of the team? Does the coach actually have a say? So it sort of reminds me of a situation like what's happening with Manchester United, where they're going through a lot of coaches. That's 5 coaches in a decade that the West Tigers have had. That's a coach every 2 seasons. That is not sustainable. That is not a blueprint for being a successful team. And Hello, Tommy. Yeah, it's not a blueprint for long-term stability and success. And in that time frame, not only have they let go of some pretty talented players, one of the coaches they've let go has gone on to win the competition and play and coach. In back-to-back grand finals in Ivan Cleary. They've lost Adokar, multiple championship winner. Pappenhausen, Mitch Moses. These are Origin level players, and possibly and not only are they Origin level, these are Rep level. They are some of the best players in the game. Would Cardiff be a good move for Gareth Bale? Well, I don't think it'd be a good move for Cardiff because I think that's going to create issues within that dressing room that they cannot foresee. Now, yes, he's a Cardiff boy. He's a local lad to the city. But they didn't develop him. Southampton did. Spurs decided to change his position he played in. They moved him from a wing back to a winger, and then Real Madrid made him and broke him. Basically, I think that could seriously impact their ability to field a balanced side. It will cause a massive distraction. Bear in mind, this side wants to get back to the Premier League, where they haven't had a lot of success in the top flight, and it's a delusion of grandeur. If there were a Premier League side and a solid Premier League side that were doing quite well, then it's not a bad move to get a veteran player like Gareth Bale to wind down his career, a couple of seasons, help some young players come through, be a leader. But they are a middling Championship side at best. He's going to be brutally tackled in the Championship. Like Championship players are going to go for him. If he has a bad performance with some fitness issues, the same, unfair, I think, to a certain extent. He didn't really get the Real Madrid fans on side. But if fitness becomes an issue and form was to become an issue, bad performances, the same headlines that occurred in Spain will occur in the Welsh local media and the national media here, and it could backfire on Cardiff. Now, I think had Wales lost that game, that's his last game. He retires. I think a better place for Gareth Bale to play is the MLS, because he can do half a season in the MLS where he's playing regularly, because it's a slightly lower level of football, but it is a top flight league in the sense that it is the highest professional level in the US and Canada. He will be playing against players who will be playing in the World Cup. And the conditions actually in the US in the height of summer in some of the locations, ironically, would mirror some of the weather conditions, the dry, arid, like teams in Texas or training camps in Arizona, things like that, would actually mirror some of the conditions that are going to be experienced in Qatar. Also, you want a dry, arid climate. Playing games in California, you're going to have that slight coastal breeze, but it's going to be predominantly dry air. You're going to get that in Qatar. That would be possibly the best preparation. Yes, I have seen what's going on with the Canadian national tide. They basically went on a strike. It's in regards to their revenue sharing agreement that was signed in regards for international participation, what the match fees, the prize money distribution, how much money goes to the federation, how much money goes to the players, both men's and women's. And they're not arguing for 50% equal share between the men and women. They're not doing a Megan Rapinoe. And then there are some idiots who believe you haven't fully read the statement, haven't fully read the breakdown of what they were expecting, and then future gradings of what was expected. What they were promised and what the Federation, the Football Association of Canada, the Federation, the Canadian Soccer Federation, because what they actually promised the players and what they're actually delivering for the players is a cause of concern. This is not the first time this has happened with an international team or the national side and their governing body. This is not a rare. This is actually more common than you realise in international sport, where basically match fees, participation fees, prize money. There's a disagreement between a group collective. And this is down to corporate agreements as well with sponsors. Sponsors will be looking at this going, this is actually hugely embarrassing for the sport, considering it's the first tournament since '86 at the World Cup. In that regard, it's only their second overall at the World Cup. This is a historic moment. They're going into the next World Cup cycle as co-hosts, and it's a difficult one. The headset thing. I've done this before. I had the headset in storage. I've got a better headset than this for comfort for me, and for what I hear and stuff. I've had a few issues with this mic and the sound pickup. This is actually my Xbox headset, Turtle Beach. Little plug there. I've had it for several years. I've experimented with a couple of headsets and a standalone mic. The mic stand's actually broken now. The mic still works. The stand's broken, so I'll have to hold it like that. And I don't want to hold a microphone for hours because my arm would go dead. And I've got the ponytail out. I've put the hair in the ponytail. So I didn't get a haircut. I haven't hit 1,000 subs yet because the hair would all be shaved off. I've just put it in a ponytail. Just to see how comfortable it is, because this is the first time I've had it in a ponytail for 4 years. So I'm just seeing how comfortable it is for work more than anything. But I noticed with the headset last night, the hair was going everywhere, and it was a bit of a pain in the arse to focus. It was very distracting. It is getting long. I don't like keep wearing. I know the hats. My funky hats are a bit of a signature thing, but my favourite hat is, well, it's no longer with us. It's died. It fell apart. So I want to mix things up a little bit. I'm going to try and get another microphone, standalone mic thing, simply because just a little mic with a little mic stand. The one I have just isn't. The stand isn't very good. So I'm trying to experiment with new things to basically improve the audio quality. The video quality, I'm limited with what I can do. My webcam's even older than the webcam inbuilt my laptop, so I'm aware like the picture quality isn't the greatest, and the lighting in my apartment, in my flat, isn't the greatest either. Yes, I'm south facing, but my apartment block is surrounded by very, very tall trees, and I'm on the ground floor, so lighting is a bit problematic. So yeah, there is that. Bale and Ramsey at Rangers, that's a possibility. I thought Aaron Ramsey had a bigger impact on the game on Sunday than actually Gareth Bale. Apart from free kick notwithstanding, Aaron Ramsey just looked hungrier in the game. And while Gareth Bale's, I think, got the better skill set as a player, there's no doubting Aaron Ramsey's hunger in the game. Scotland could be a good wind down, but I think the MLS, could be that because Scottish football can get a bit nasty in the sense that players will target him. And like an Old Firm derby or a capital city derby can get quite nasty, and there is that undercurrent sectarian element isn't overly pleasant, whereas in the MLS you don't get that. So and in the MLS they're used to these big name marquee players like Ibrahimovic, like David Beckham, like an Andrea Pirlo going over there and quite literally being anonymous off the field. Although Gareth Bale with his links to Real Madrid, much like David Beckham, probably might be as anonymous as like a Kaká or a Pirlo or a Wright Phillips, because he's such a big name. 5 out of 25 Tampa Bay Rays players refused to wear an LGBTQ patch for Pride Night for religious reasons. Well, you have to remember that a lot of baseball players are Hispanic and obviously the Catholic Church in Latin America is a big part of social and daily life, and community life. If you agree with religion or not, it's irrelevant. I try and keep the politics off the channel in regards to sport. It's getting more and more difficult. The last couple of years has proven how difficult it is, with various agendas being thrust. You know, uh, uh, upon what should be an apolitical, as in not a no political bias kind of social activity. But at the same time, we've seen it also with a French PSG player refusing to do the same thing with the numbers on the back of his shirt. For me, I'm torn on the issue. I have friends who are members of that community, and I've also got friends who are very deeply religious as well. And I've got some friends who are both religious and of the LGBTQ community, and it's a very, I wouldn't say grey area. It's a very tense area, because we're talking about civil rights basically. And in some countries, it's illegal to be, not of the state religion. You can get severely punished for practicing your faith, or you can be targeted or unfairly tried in courts and things like that. And there's prejudice. And at the same time, the LGBTQ community has that same prejudice. So there is freedom of expression and freedom of choice, especially in the US. It's going to be dividing opinion. In regards to the fact that 1/5 of the team that took the field were against the MLS backing Pride Night. Not the MLS, the Major League Baseball. Sorry, bearing in mind Major League Baseball is a league where controversy seems to follow it all over the place. It doesn't matter what Major League Baseball tries and does to modernise its image or trying to appeal to a wider audience. It seems to shoot itself in the foot. It's a league with a history of scandal and negativity, and this is a league coming off the back of a lockout. That was the longest lockout stoppage, the second longest labour stoppage in the league's lengthy history. Not long after the fraught return to play negotiations in 2020, and not long after the Astros and Red Sox sign stealing scandals and cheating scandals, still recovering from the steroid scandal. So it seems to lurch from one crisis to another. I don't know what to really say that's going to not cause unnecessary argument, and I try and take a balanced opinion. They are well within their rights to not support something that goes against their moral values or their religious views or social views. And then there'll be people in the LGBT community call them living in the Stone Age and bigots. But then they're the ones being the bigots, if you know what I mean. I don't know. The Canadian Soccer Association, or the federation, basically. I'll call it the Football Association. There's a lot of questions coming, so bear with me. Right, where are we? Let me. Oh God, slow down a sec. The top Canadian clubs like Vancouver and Montreal and Toronto play in the MLS. The players and the Canadian Federation are trying to come to a solution, because they do have a competitive international that actually does mean something in a couple of days. And Vancouver is an important city when it comes to the sport in Canada. It's one of their biggest markets in Canada. It's got one of their biggest stadiums that they play in, and they are trying to prepare for a World Cup, so they need as many competitive matches as possible. We can debate the pros and cons of the Nations League format to death, but hang on a second. Yeah, we can debate the pros and cons of the format of the Nations League formats, depending on if you're UEFA, CONCACAF, CONMEBOL, you name it. We can debate I've got yeah, that's it. Yeah, we can debate the flaws in the system in regards to I'm going to have to sit like this again. My stomach and my back are killing me. No, we can debate the flaws of the Nations League format, but they are competitive internationals. Canada will be treating this like they would treat the group stage in the World Cup. It's good practice for them. And the situation though with the Canadian, it's a bit more complex than just revenue sharing, and it's also to do with grassroots development. Pathways, talent pathways, growing the game further, because the MLS will continue to expand. I have no doubt on that. I think they want to get to around either 24 to 32 teams, and try and get the biggest TV deal and sponsorship deals that they possibly can. They want to reach as many households and sports markets in the US. They want to, obviously grow the game, and Canada as well. And of course, the Canadians are co-hosts of the next World Cup after Qatar. So any labour dispute is going to look very, very bad, especially when they're trying to grow the sport domestically in Canada, when they've got to compete against the CFL, they've got to compete against the NHL as the two leagues that are national leagues, where they have national TV deals and hardened fan bases, big fan bases, trying to compete against the NBA, Major League Baseball. There will be Canadian fans who do watch the NFL. There will be Canadian fans who watch other sports leagues around the world, rugby union, rugby league, whatever it may be. They're trying to encourage those fans to support a new sport, or buy into the sport, grow the sport. So any labour stoppage or dispute that ultimately impacts them playing games will not look good domestically in Canada. Won't look good to FIFA, going, well, we've awarded these guys a World Cup. So it's a difficult one. I think the best place for Gareth Bale is the MLS. Whatever side, it's irrelevant. I think, yes, there's a soft cap system, and he's a marquee overseas player, so teams can work that into their soft salary cap without actually hampering themselves. And he's available right now. And instead of having to learn a new language, they speak English. He will probably want to go where British players have played before. So that'd be Portland, that'd be LA, that'd be Toronto. And he will probably lean on, like, Jermaine Defoe's played in the MLS. So he'll probably lean on someone like Jermaine Defoe, ex-teammate at Spurs, to go, what was Toronto like as a city? What was it like to play in? What's the organisation like? Should I go and sign there for 6 months leading into the World Cup? And just to keep his match fitness and keep himself playing. And then depending on how the World Cup goes, he's not committed to a 1.5 year deal, which will look bad if he suddenly retires after the World Cup. He's committed himself to 6 months in the MLS to, keep himself match fit, help a team try and win a championship, go into the World Cup with that match fitness, be as effective as he can for Wales, and then make a decision on his longer term future. Right, let's have a look. God, there's a lot of a lot of things debating his golf game. He has been criticised for spending far too much time on the golf course, when actually he is fully fit and able to play. He has had a troubled relationship at Real Madrid in recent years. He's got several coaches to sack, and the Spanish media and a fair proportion of the fan base didn't really warm to him from the beginning. So that's not a good thing. You're going to watch the start of the England game just to see if they get booed. Look, if England play badly against Germany and put in a performance like they did against Hungary, they're in trouble. Big trouble. Again, this is where I think the politics has started to distract from what they're paid to do. And yes, it's a privilege, not a right, to be in their position. But a lot of the players, and I did say this when I was doing match reviews on like the latter stages of the FA Cup, when I was watching the Europa League final and the Champions League. I fell asleep during the Europa Conference League final simply because I was just that tired, not because I didn't find the sport interesting and the bit I was exhausted. The players look dead tired to me. There were periods in the FA Cup semi-finals and even the quarterfinals where the players just were shattered. The FA Cup final itself wasn't the worst FA Cup final I've seen, but it wasn't the best. And the players looked absolutely exhausted. And I have to admit, the Welsh performance against Ukraine was possibly the best football I have seen since, I would say, February, March. That's the best football I have seen in the best part of 3-4 months. And yes, it was a winner takes all kind of match, so it actually does, ramp things up a bit. But some of the players there hadn't played for a while, which I think benefited both Ukraine and Wales. And some of the players were a bit fresher, like a Gareth Bale, and in fact most of the Ukraine squad for that matter. But I am concerned about player welfare, and I think Kevin De Bruyne's comments in regards to the Nations League, going, they are glorified friendlies, I have no interest in this, my heart isn't in it, basically is what he was saying. He's basically throwing shade at UEFA, is a good way of putting it. He was basically criticising UEFA for pushing this format, considering the COVID pandemic, the disruption to the domestic league seasons that we've seen over the last 2 years, the disruption to the international calendar, and a World Cup taking place at an odd time of year. They are starting to question, is it really about the football, or is it about recouping lost revenue? Because fans have been complaining about ticket price for ages. And there is a fair bit of criticism aimed at the price of tickets, how they've literally just finished the season, and they're just then thrown into internationals. Do I think the Colorado Avalanche win the Stanley Cup? Well, I did say that playoff series between the Oilers and the Avalanche would depend on how battered the Oilers were after the Battle of Alberta. They were battered, clearly. And defence wasn't a thing. So if the Rangers or the Lightning finally get through, the Avalanche have to defend better. Southgate, I think that's also a directive from his superiors at the FA. The FA have latched on to certain social movements, I think is the best way to describe it. And there is a political element to it, and but I think it is starting to become an unnecessary. It was already a distraction that was unnecessary to begin with. It's created a lot of division within the fan base. You can be pro civil rights and pro social improvement without having to, bend your knee to do it. And in some cultures, if you are seen to kneel in front of someone else, that's a sign of weakness. And in other cultures, it's a sign of submission, which is not seen as socially acceptable. And there are players from minority backgrounds. You said it has now lost its meaning. It's becoming pointless. It's actually more damaging than helpful. It's causing more division than unity. When you've got players like Wilfried Zaha, the community they are trying to allegedly say that this is a community that's unfairly targeted, unfairly stigmatized against, all these things. When they're coming out and saying, you know what, just stop doing it now. It says that the message has become lost. The message is alienating the people that you want to get on side. There are other ways, and possibly better ways, to get your message across than what they're doing. And what we found out about the BLM movement in America, tying yourself to that basically Ponzi scheme is what it was, fraud. They stole genuine people's money, and the founders of this movement did it for the money. They used it and hijacked a serious issue for cash, which has damaged the whole. We have the Kick It Out campaign, which is FA backed charity. That's clearly failed. We've had that campaign for the most of my life. It's clearly not worked then. And there's been question marks over the financing, and Lord Ousley, the guy who helped set it up, for years in regards to corruption and some dodgy dealings. So there's no transparency there anyway. The Rainbow Laces, there's still one openly gay player in English football. Women's football, it's not a problem. Men's football, it is. Because, the bigots will be like, I don't mind lesbianism because I watch it in 4K HD at home, you know what I mean? Because they're generally that kind of think they're funny. And yeah, that's a bit of a joke that, I wind up homophobes with. Is like, oh, how do you view lesbianism? 4K HD like you? Or one of my best mates is the so-called dyke you're slagging off, who's probably harder than you, will knock you the fuck out. And I actually have seen one of my mates who is a lesbian knock out a homophobe in a pub. It was hilarious. She put his head into the bar, basically, and did some nasty damage to his face, which was quite satisfying, considering he'd also knocked over my pint and called me a few expletives under the sun that are not repeatable expletives, in the sense that just no. And he was also racist to a friend of mine as well, who's a gentle giant, but I know will probably have ripped his face off had his boss not been there. The National League playoff final was much better than the finals. You said, well, look, the fact that the reporting by the mainstream media was showing Solihull Moors winning 2-1. So some poor sod is just, made to look like a tit down the pub in front of his mates. It's a bit embarrassing. Tamori should be played. There is an argument to freshen things up. We need to see what our squad depth's really like going into a tournament. Personally, I consistently say that the talent level in soccer football, I call it, you call it soccer, has dropped over the past 20 years. I think the quality level as a whole and the product is not what it was. There's too much money in the game. That's my opinion. Oh, the fitness is I think players are overcoached. There's no doubt on their fitness and stamina, but I do believe there is an element of overcoaching and too much rigidity in tactics. And I also think that there is too much money in the sport, and that does have a knock-on impact when we are discussing quality and entertainment. That's just personal opinion. I think, however, with what we've seen over the last 2 and a bit years in regards to the pandemic, like shutting down leagues worldwide, I think there has been a knock-on impact in some way. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of mental burnout, I think, that's affecting players. And I think some players are becoming very disinterested and disconnected. There's a lot of players who are not in it for the money. The money's a bonus for them. It sets their kids up for life. It means their parents can retire early. They make wise investments. But there's other players who forget that it's a privilege, not a right, to be a professional athlete. Their attitude stinks of entitlement. They don't come across as particularly desirable individuals. Now, you've got to be driven to win. I get that. There's a winning mentality, and then there's being a disgusting human being. And there's a fair few of them that come across as, well, their public image is completely different to what you actually see when you actually bump into them, when the cameras aren't rolling, when the media aren't there. And they're completely different people. And I can tell you from personal experience, because I've met some of these, Premier League and Championship level players and managers, that when the media ain't there and they're not being interviewed and they're not, smiles for the camera, positive image, they are generally abhorrent individuals. There's a minority, but there's enough. I've met enough of them to go, you're not particularly pleasant people. And then you get a situation like Mason Greenwood's situation, or a Benjamin Mendy, with what charges they're facing, and there's also a certain level of respect for other human beings. And the Zuma situation with the Zuma brothers, Kurt Zuma and his younger brother, with animal abuse allegations. We've got abuse of domestic violence, basically, and some quite nasty stuff. No, his younger brother was involved as well. His younger brother was caught on tape, involved in the incident. However, charges weren't brought against him, but it did impact him at club level for Dagenham. So yes, it wasn't just Kurt; it was his younger brother as well. It's overkill. It's overkill. Nations League winner is nice to win, but it's not massive like a World Cup every year. Yeah, a week after the regular season's, a week or two after you've finished your regular season, to be thrown in. But I think that is good practice for the World Cup, and I think the World Cup is going to look very, very similar to what we're seeing in this Nations League format, where players are going to go straight from their club teams, and with a week and a half, they're playing their first World Cup matches. So it does raise some concerns about the player welfare for me. You would like to see Mourinho in as England. Well, Mourinho as an international manager. Forget the country. Not just England, but any country. It'll be interesting, but remember, coaching at club level is different to coaching at international level. You can be a lot more hands-on for a longer period of time and build that relationship with your players and coaching staff and the people above you. So your director of football, your youth development team, over a longer period of time than with just the national side of whatever sport you're in, because you have a smaller period of time working with your players. Now, you'll be still having those meetings with like the player development, talent scouts who will be looking in the lower levels. Actually, this guy's eligible to play for us. The youth development programs for sponsors, the various corporate and sporting managers above you. That's a 24/7 kind of job. But the actual being involved with your other coaches and players on a face-to-face training camps and matches is a lot less. So you have to get all that intensity you would normally get in a regular season with those players in a shorter time frame, and it's very, very difficult to get that balance right. That's why Gareth Southgate, as a club manager, was useless. As an international manager, he's significantly better. His tactics are crap, but the results are there. So it's definitely a different style of management that you have to set yourself up for. You have to change your managerial style because you'll be managing players from multiple teams who play different styles in their domestic club games, to then merge them into a style that suits the national side, which could be alien to some of the players you'll be coaching and some of the and I think Mourinho works better as a club manager anyway. The only club he's not won any silverware with is Spurs. Let that sink in. Have Roma underachieved in the hit? Yes, simple answer to that one. Yes, is just the simple answer. They play too much, and some players come out about mental. I think it's more. I wouldn't say they necessarily play too much because some players have got a long spells of injury and health issues, and they have to battle certain things. Some players, I think, there's a lot of media speculation about players. Contract negotiations can be played out quite publicly. There's a lot of players that are advised about their image and selling their image. So a lot of players have got striking up sponsorship deals. They don't get to live a normal life away from football or rugby league or rugby union or the NFL or the NHL. They're constantly being judged for what they do. They can't basically live a normal life, which would be just away from work. You can relax. It's social media. I think that's definitely having an impact, and not more negative than positive. In regards to player welfare on the mental side, Harry Maguire in football, for example, soccer to non-Europeans, is a prime example of. Yes, he's openly said yes, performances haven't been great the last 18 months. He hold his hand up and saying, yeah, it hasn't really worked under Mourinho and under Solskjaer. It hasn't been the most pleasant experience for him, and I think that's having an impact. Do you think Brian Clough would have been a big success? Yes. He thought outside the box. He was his sense of humour put a lot of players at ease. And while he could be a bit aloof at times, he definitely figured out players' strengths and weaknesses pretty quick. He definitely made players play better than where they played before. He used to famously bring his Nigel, his son, to games to sit on the bench with the players. The players treated his son Nigel as basically an unofficial team mascot at Nottingham Forest, and then of course his son goes on to play and also be a manager of a decent level. He's not the same as his father, but I think he had the best teacher. I think again that's a hypothetical. Obviously, Don Revie got the job in the end. Didn't work out for Don Revie, but it did work out for Clough going back to Derby first and then to Forest and then winning, a couple of league titles, a couple of European titles, and 4 League Cups. So I think it's worked out. I think he wouldn't have. I think today's players wouldn't have coped with Clough rather than Clough wouldn't have coped with today's players. He'll be the type of manager to bring in a social media blackout. He'll be the type of manager to basically put a code of conduct in place that if you basically the zero dickhead policy. It was all. I mean, bear in mind, Clough was a famous alcoholic, but at the same time, he was a functioning alcoholic. It did ultimately affect his family and his working relationships quite badly. But at the same time, he wasn't one of those to be caught in pubs and nightclubs brawling, for example. He was just an aloof functioning alcoholic. But at the same time, he would always expect the highest. So it's a bit of a chalk and cheese with him because he would expect the highest standards from his players whilst battling alcoholism. And obviously, look at Gaza and Merson and Tony Adams, who players who come since. 2 of them have failed in management quite spectacularly. Gaza very spectacularly, and Tony Adams it hasn't really worked, but he gave it a fair crack. Has Page done a good job for Wales? We're a bit lucky. Bearing in mind the situation he had to step into with the Ryan Giggs situation. I think he's done exceptionally well considering the situation he was forced into. because until Ryan Giggs' conviction, it was only a temporary assignment, and now he's made it his own. And he's built a reputation. The players clearly respond to him. He's he's coached them now in back-to-back tournaments. Admittedly, he didn't qualify them for the last tournament, in that sense, but he was there. He's got them qualification to another tournament, and no, I think he's done quite well. With the resources he's got available, considering that football is not Wales's national sport, that's rugby union. Yeah, that in itself tells you everything you need to know. He's walked into a very difficult situation where Ryan Giggs, the guy who was in that position, who built the team, got the team to put the building blocks in place, has obviously had very explosive off-field dramas away from work, personal life meltdown, very well documented. The issues that Ryan Giggs has had over the last 10 to 15 years in his personal life. Some very serious allegations that were proven in court, which, his own father, who he had a difficult relationship with, has basically said he wants nothing to do with one of his two sons, which is, quite damning, really. His brother wants nothing to do with him. So, and Ryan Giggs was Wales' probably greatest ever player, in my opinion. But Page has gone in and he's done a very, very good job in difficult testing circumstances when he took the job. There were some people who were like, "Who is this guy? He's not going to do very well." No, he's done fantastically well with the resources he's had available. Yes, he's got a couple of world-class players in there, in Bale and Ramsey, but with the resources he's had available, and with the fact that the sport is not the national sport in the sense of participation and fandom, yeah, he's done pretty good. And with no top flight sides in the Premier League at the moment in Wales, with 3 clubs in the English Football League and 2 in the English non-league at the moment, although 4 of those 5 clubs are fully professional, which is tells you something. Yeah, Giggs better than Bale. Actually, when they say not at international level, Giggs was in his prime, was playing at a time when Welsh football was not great, and the managers weren't great, and the player depth wasn't there that it is now. Partly because of Ryan Giggs himself, inspiring a lot of young kids to go, "I don't want to play rugby or play cricket for Glamorgan. I want to put on that red for Wales." So, if it wasn't for Ryan Giggs, the player, you don't have Gareth, Bale, and Aaron Ramsey. And if it wasn't for Ian Rush, for example, you don't have Ryan Giggs. If it wasn't for John Toshak, you don't have Ian Rush. So you have that generational player that comes along that inspires other kids, other young players, and one or two of them will become a generational player. Bobby Charlton, Bobby Moore. I would go Bobby Moore, to be fair, the most dominant player in his position. But George Best never got to play at the World Cup. Souness. There's individual talents, but it's subjective, so there's no right or wrong answer. There you go. An aloof, functioning alcoholic. That's not a walking contradiction. Most alcoholics generally actually live by themselves and are quite lonely people, and don't have a lot of strong friendships. That's how addiction starts: is you are vulnerable, you're lonely, and depression's a part of it. And if Brian Clough was alive today, he'll probably be described as not an introvert, but probably described as quite high on the spectrum. of the autism spectrum, possibly Asperger's, to be fair, or ADHD, because he was always a little bit of a fidget, and he sometimes put his foot in his mouth with some of the things that he said. And a lot of people with ADHD, like myself, have been addicts, and I hold my hand up. And sometimes find it uh, difficult to form those positive working and non-working relationships. And that sounds like someone with ADHD with a high functioning addiction, where they can still go to work, but at the same time, it is slowly destroying their personal and family lives, which it did. Um, uh, but no, an aloof functioning alcoholic is the best way I can describe Clough. Greatest bit is purple Tommy answer that. As it is, Rob Page should be applauded. I think he should be. I can't see if Ryan Giggs gets, you know, well, no, Rob Page should keep the job permanently. I think they should tear up Ryan Giggs' contract. He has been found guilty of some pretty nasty stuff in court. If the Welsh FA is to not only grow the game for the men's game, but also the women's game and improve the level of the women's game, they cannot in any way bring Ryan Giggs back into the fold, because that would be a PR disaster, because then it is legitimising violence against women, domestic violence in general, which has already seen a heavy spike in cases because of the pandemic. That would be a backward step by the Welsh FA. Rob Page has done better than Ryan Giggs has anyway, in my opinion. And he's qualified them for their first World Cup since 1958. So, and Ryan Giggs failed to do that in 2018. So yes, he's done better than Giggs. And coaching Wales in back-to-back tournaments, again, Ryan Giggs hasn't done that. So yeah, I would keep Rob Page in place. The players respond to him. He's pragmatic. He knows when they are true underdogs. So yeah, I'll keep. It is what it is. A combined British football team, how many non-England players would get into this team? There wouldn't be a lot of Scottish players. And I think with the way the Welsh played in regards to how England played over the weekend, I think there'll be a few Welsh players. I think Wayne Hennessy, on his 2 performances last week, especially with his heroics on Sunday, with that lack of game time at Burnley, that's cult status. My dad works with handicapped people, and he says undiagnosed or underdiagnosed, I think, or misdiagnosed is actually the better one, because I was misdiagnosed with dyspraxia, which is not the case. It is generally I have ADHD. And so, yeah, it is more prevalent. It's also very surprising that apparently every male is on the spectrum, but apparently 25% of females or something. I find that, I think it's easy to label people rather than everyone's personalities and skill strengths and things are different. Personally, but yeah, no, there's definitely, yeah, there's, it's interesting. I think looking at people with addiction, a lot of them have some sort of story of bullying or background of being bullied or abuse, or bereavement. Ironically, bereavement's a big trigger. And what we're teaching in sport and schools now is it's the participation that counts. Everyone's a winner here. So kids today are not being taught to accept defeat and learn from it. And they can't deal with loss very well. They're not taught how to overcome that. And then when it does happen, they have a meltdown. But there's a lot of pressure put upon professional sports. But 3-5-2. I don't mind the wing back formation because then you can cover yourself defensively and in attack. It means you can be flexible with a 5 or a 3. And with someone like Kyle Walker and a Kieran Trippier style player, you've technically got some hybrid, sweepers in a sense. Saka would be a perfect player to play in a hybrid sweeper position to because of his pace. But I think the problem I have with the look, if we go with 5 at the back, that's parking the bus. This is where you just want those warm-up friendlies before the tournament. There isn't time because FIFA have decided from the get-go that okay, we're not gonna go through the voting process again. We've got Qatar. We're stuck with it. And for the first couple of years after Qatar were awarded the tournament, they were like, oh, it's going to be a summer tournament. And people were like, you are aware Qatar gets 50, 60 degrees Celsius in the height of their summer, right? And if I was a manager, what style of play would I have? 4-3-3. Or some kind of hybrid sweeper formation, take the pressure off the goalkeeper. So I wouldn't play a high line, but I would have a deep holding midfielder that would drop back as a sweeper. So rather than having 2 holding midfielders, I would have one who would also, like a David Luiz type player, which they are, young, pacey, defensive minded, but also attacking minded players who can start those long driving runs. I would always play with a sweeper. You take the pressure off the goalkeeper. That's one less decision the goalkeeper's got to make. His job is to keep the ball out of the net, not be a Rene Higuita impersonator. And Rene Higuita didn't always keep the ball out of the net very, very effectively. I would play with a hybrid sweeper at the back. So I would play with a hybrid 4-5 at the back, but with that sweeper kind of driving runs and leading counter attacks. It would basically be a 4-1-3-2. There you go. Yeah, I did that. I did a thing. So basically, it'd be like a variant of a 4-4-4, a 4-4-2 diamond, but with a sweeper instead of a deep holding midfielder. There you go. Yeah, mine would be a 4-1-3-2. There you go. I would have a one sort of attack-minded centre back sweeper. So completely weird formation, I know. Very rarely used, the sweeper, but it takes the pressure off the goalkeeper. Completely takes the pressure off the goalkeeper, but it does mean you can't play the offside trap as effectively. Because without the ball, you want that player just to sit deep. It covers the chip over the top and the running behind, but it does mean that you've technically got a third centre back, but also you've got a third or fourth midfielder. So you've got to be good on the ball, and you've got to be able to tackle. So sort of like using Kante in a way, but and combining Kante and Claude Makélélé together, you and Beckenbauer, you get the ultimate sweeper. So there you go. But that's just me. If you have a joint manager, dead or alive, who would it be? If I had to have a joint manager, fucking hell, I'm not a big fan of that. I wouldn't. If I'm being brutally honest, it's not something that because then you've got two voices in the room, and I think that doesn't work. You want to have a clear message, not that, because they may not be singing from the same hymn sheet on every single play. It gives you what it rarely works. The joint manager, the co-manager, it rarely works. I don't think there's ever been a co-manager where they're both equal in standing. That's won the league. Even Brian Clough, he was with his, I forget the guy's name. He coached Brighton. They were very good as a double act, in the sense that Brian Clough was the manager, he was the assistant manager, but he would advise, not tell. No, it is the ECB stands for England Wales Cricket Board. They just dropped it should be EWCB, but no, it is England Wales because they have Glamorgan, and if you actually look at your geography, Glamorgan's a Welsh county. But a lot of the Welsh players actually come from Mom this year, so there you go. Cricket's not very popular in Wales in the sense, apart from Glamorgan and Monmouthshire. It's not. It's rugby union really, and even then, that's the south of Wales. It is the England and Wales Cricket Board. Yeah, Peter Taylor. That's the guy's name. Peter Taylor. Yeah, and he had a good spell at Brighton in his own right. He was a very capable manager in his own right. He was also a very, very good assistant. It's a difficult one. I'm not a fan of the co-manager because on the actual team sheet it is listed Brian Clough, Peter Taylor assistant, and he was a very, very good assistant who had a fair, could deal with individual players and was a good manager in his own right. But I'm not a fan of the joint co-manager. It's not a successful format historically in the sense that there's not many that do it at the top level for a very long period of time. It's been tried, doesn't really work. I probably won't be on for too long tonight. I've got a lot to get done. But I thought I would experiment again with the headset and the ponytail. See, ponytail. That's how long my hair's got. That's the longest it's been in a very long time. I think I don't follow the Nations League. It's not a format I'm sold on, and I don't want to knock the players. A lot of them looked very leggy towards the end of the regular season and the cup games as well, the finals and semi-finals, as I say. And that was noted by a lot of people that the players looked out on their feet. And that'll be interesting. That's an interesting one. When you've got a player who's been part of a successful season and a successful team, why would you want to leave a happy environment? So obviously that he's not guaranteed a position. Obviously Forest are like, we're going to sign someone. You're going to have to fight for this place. I don't know enough about the. Well, maybe he feels he deserves, a pay rise. Maybe they're not willing to negotiate on that. Again, this is the media speculating whether he's actually officially said it or not. Until a player goes, "I've handed in a transfer request" in a press conference, which they never do, by the way. There's not enough. There's not enough. Will the National League eventually have 3 promoted places? The playoff system, particularly in that league. Look, the National League chairman or CEO came out and admitted that he accepts the criticism of the ticketing price, and in his statement, the promotion system was brought up in his interview. And it is a proposal of the 3 up, 3 down. Do they get rid of the playoffs and just do 3 up, 3 down, or expand promotion relegation? And that is also a discussion they have to have with the Football League and the FA. The other option is absorb the National League into the Football League system, but leave National North and South as the non-league top tier. So the champions of National League North, the champions of National League South, and then a playoff structure where teams from the other leagues bat out to make it to the top. Is another option they could have, but there are several ideas that have been put forward, and even when I was doing my Football League history video, there was I could have mentioned more about the playoff structure. Back in the 80s, so a few years before I was born, there was a big debate about the playoff structure that was in place at the time. And it was being criticised. And the FA and the Football League and what was the conference, the non-league, the various non-league structures in place at the time basically came out and said, look, it's the best system we have at the moment. And it was being criticised and fans weren't overly happy with it. And it was, I think, 86, 87, 88, something like that. It was just before I was born. It was introduced, and the first couple of seasons it was going. Fans were not overly sold on the playoffs. I don't think fans, as a whole, as a rule, have ever really been sold on the playoffs as the best way to deal with the third or second or fourth in some leagues. Promotion position, and in the German and Scottish league systems, for example, you have a playoff to avoid relegation and or promotion. So other leagues and other FAs do it differently. There is no perfect playoff system. I think promotion relegation is the system we have in place. The best way to do it is straight up, straight down. You reward the more successful teams with going up, and you punish the least successful teams by relegating them down. And that is the simplest system to have. I don't like the relegation promotion playoff. It's been heavily criticised in Scotland for years. It's been, I think is it France or it's France. Look at the scenes with St Etienne and Auxerre, and I think Germany has it as well. It's been heavily criticised in those leagues for years, and they've had that system in place for years. It's not something they just thought up overnight. It's their established playoff relegation structures that they have. Why? Look at Nottingham Forest. Was it sixth? Did they finish? I think it was 6th or 7th. They finished this season. Huddersfield finished 3rd. Or was it QPR? It was either QPR or Huddersfield finished higher up. I think it was Huddersfield. Sheffield United, I think, finished higher up. They're not promoted. Wrexham was 2nd in the National League, for example. 2nd best team in the National League. Not promoted. Now, I don't know. I think Grimsby finished quite low down in their playoff structure as well. Grimsby and Solihull Moors, I think, were the 2 lowest teams in their playoff structure, they make the final. It is like a lottery, you know. The playoff winner gets a bigger prize pot than the league winner. I mean, that, isn't right. So yeah, Grimsby, the 6th place team, is promoted when the second best team in the league, if that was the Championship, Wrexham would have been promoted to the Premier League. For example, if that was the Championship and Grimsby finished second, they would be a Premier League side. Now, this is what I'm getting at. And fans have also not only criticised the system for 30 odd years, I think 34, 35 years, the ticket price is now being heavily criticised and has been for a good 4 or 5 years now. The pricing of tickets has been heavily criticised. So the best way to do promotion relegation is 3 up, 3 down, or 4 up, 4 down. Basically, straight up, straight down. Get rid of playoffs. That's the fairest way to do it. It's not nice missing out. It's not nice getting relegated or missing out on promotion or whatever, but that is the fairest way to do it. Yeah, I'm as I say, I'm not a fan of how the playoffs are structured either, because the winner of the playoff final in the Championship won 175 million in prize money on top of their league finishing position prize money as well. So, depending where, I think it was Nottingham Forest finished 7th. Don't know how much prize that money that is in the Championship, but basically their season has equivalated to more than what the Premier League winners get in prize money, more prize money than the Champions League winners get. Basically, they've earned more money in one game. For prize money alone, that's not including ticket revenue, just prize money alone in one game, than a team at a higher level gets. It's ridiculous. You say it makes means teams have something to play for, but this no, I think the incentive should be those automatic promotion spots are coveted. They're hard to get hold of. The fans are criticising it, and it's an incentive. Play harder. Play harder. And if, as a Blackburn fan, I can tell you, we were, in the top 3 for 2/3 of the season. We finished 9th, 10th even. We dropped off. So the incentive was there to try and do it automatically, win less prize money, but just get in there, get up, get promoted. Yeah, it didn't happen. I wouldn't reduce the number of teams in the National League. I would just alter the promotion relegation to 3 up, 3 down, or 4 up, 4 down, because there's too many teams of a Football League standard with Football League or even Premier League fan bases in there. And it's not sustainable to have that many teams of that higher standard historically. But the size of Notts County's fan base is ridiculously big. It's just economic suicide for those clubs to stay at that level. And Wrexham is like a population centre for North East Wales. That's the team of North East Wales. They attract fans from a bigger catchment area historically than their biggest rival, Shrewsbury. And they've got a fantastic history of Wrexham. Fantastic history. And the situation that Wrexham find themselves in now with Ryan Reynolds, that's really put the focus back on them. And yeah, it's definitely got a lot of people interested in Wrexham again, with what's going on, and narrowly missing out on promotion. I think it's got to spur them on. It's been 15 years. It's been nearly half my life they've been outside the Football League. Club of that size, it's not right, and that just shows how hard it is to get out of the non-league and back to the Football League. It really shows how difficult getting out of the National League back into the Football League is. 15 years now. Be 16 years this time next year if they fail to get up. But I think Wrexham can get promoted next year as champions. I think they can. But yeah, not only are they the biggest team in northeast Wales, yeah. The other 4 sides involved in the English system are all in the southeast. So they are the team for the rest of Wales. And that sums up the state of Welsh football. And the depth and the quality and the situation that Welsh football finds itself in at a grassroots domestic level. The fact that they have qualified for the World Cup and Scotland haven't, when Scotland have got more registered players, they've got more professional clubs, tells you all you need to know. Yeah, well, Merthyr Tydfil is still South Wales geographically. It's just in the centre of South Wales. But it's basically their fan base is still the valleys of Ebervale and Tregeaga and places like that. And I've got friends who live near Merthyr Tydfil, so Cardiff, Swansea, Newport, and Wrexham. That's it. Every other club is tiny. That's the problem. Rugby's got its own problems. Both codes in Wales have massive financial issues, and there is no rugby presence of any major successful note in North and Central Wales. Again, it's all on the southeast coast. The southeast bit of Wales is, and people think, oh, rugby, it's loved all across Wales. It really isn't, because the fan base on the Irish Sea coast and in Anglesey and the Mersey estuary area is ignored, and that can't be sustainable. And the money problems that the game in Wales is facing right now is ridiculous in rugby union. But that's been replicated across the world in various countries and domestic leagues, the money issue. And I keep going back to Augustine Pichot and his election campaign, which he didn't win, for World Rugby President in 2019. He was absolutely correct that the sport was just not sustainable in the format it currently is. And unfortunately, the powers that be went with Bill Beaumont, and the rest is history, basically. Scott, they're on about restructuring the Welsh football system, but what can be done to make it better? merging it fully with the English system. Merging clubs together and then merging the surviving clubs with the English league system. I really couldn't. I think that that could be the only way. However, the towns you've listed, like Aberystwyth, Llanelli, and Port Talbot, are rugby towns. Aberystwyth, Llanelli, and Port Talbot are rugby towns. You ask people from those locations, they are rugby towns. That is the problem. So it's all well and good saying, oh, take the bigger clubs in the Welsh system into the English league system. Fine. But if you are competing against a sport which has a more established culture, in the sense that in a location like Llanelli or Aberystwyth, they're rugby towns. And Aberystwyth being a university city, which is what it is, rugby is predominantly played at university as well, in the upper education, higher education. Football doesn't have the same impact at university. And it's also not only that, it's transport infrastructure to get to these places. So while Llanelli and Port Talbot are not too far from the M4, Aberystwyth is in the middle of fucking nowhere. It's the Welsh Loughborough. It is in the arse end of nowhere, on the central Cambrian Welsh coast. And yes, I can pronounce Welsh place names like Porthmadog, Llanelli, Aberystwyth, Merthyr Tydfil, Ebervale. Yeah, I can pronounce Welsh place names. But no, the problem is, jokes aside, is Aberystwyth is in the arse end of nowhere. Infrastructure and transport links are not limited, but it takes a long time to get to Aberystwyth. Whereas Port Talbot and Llanelli, they're not too far from Cardiff and Swansea. And Swansea and Cardiff have international airports. Aberystwyth has a train station. Yeah. There used to be a lot of Welsh teams in England. Yeah, I think. Yeah, again, yes, I completely understand. Like, Newtown and Welshpool and Carmarthen and places like that. Absolutely. The problem is that they're not massive population centres, and and they're generally, even at grassroots amateur level, it's rugby. So, can you imagine I forget. I did actually practice pronouncing this at one point, because there was a couple of Welsh kids in school, and I did spend several. One of my old teachers was Welsh. I spent several weeks practicing how to say that, and I got it right at one point, but it's hard because of all the L's, and some of them have different vowels and consonants and how they structure. But yes, I can imagine a European commentator or Clive Tilsley having a meltdown, or some Italian commentator, because in Italy they can't pronounce Llanelli. So the Llanelli Scarlets, when they're playing in rugby union, the commentators will just go Scarlets. The Llanelli Scarlets, the Italians cannot pronounce Llanelli. So there you go. Jake Sanderson. When it comes to young players coming through in any sport, I'm more reserved, and I'm more not over expectant, because a lot of pressure is put upon young players too much too soon, and it can, really affect their confidence, their mental side of things. and I think it's harder now than what it was in the 80s and 90s. So when you got players like Lemieux and Gretzky, when they were coming through, there wasn't a thing called social media. So they, if they were playing now, the expectation on them would be ridiculous, much like it is for a lot of young players, and I think it's unfair. They're kids. They are kids, if we're being honest. So let's be honest. Look, if he gets into the roster and he plays games in the NHL, in my opinion, as a sports fan, he's made it. Doesn't matter if he plays one game or 1,000. In my opinion, he's made it. So, and he's in it, but the thing is, he's in a Canadian market, regardless of how the team are doing, and that's always a nightmare for a young player being in a Canadian market first season. It's horrible. Paul Merson trying to pronounce anything. Well, Paul Merson trying to pronounce anything. He'll probably get it right, to be fair, Paul Merson. Yeah, there's a lot of places in Shropshire. I've been to Shropshire a lot. I've been to Herefordshire as well. Yeah, it's to do with the shifting borders in the early medieval period. Weird that, isn't it? I like my history. The Welsh Marchers, the Marcher Lords. It was basically the Wild West at one point in, like, between 1100 and 1250. It was like a lawless part of the world. And boundaries and place names and shifting boundaries have an impact. If had a school teacher called Mr. Llewellyn, or like Llewellyn, yeah, Llewellyn, Ap Llewellyn Griffith. Yeah, I went. There was a lad a couple of years above me. His name was Llewellyn Griffiths. Llewellyn Ap Griffiths Jones, I think, was his full name, and he was from like mid Wales. He was from Booth Wells or something like that. And he was a really good rugby player. But no, I had a teacher called Mr. Hopkins. We just called him a dickhead because he was. I've been to Tenby in Wales. Yeah, like the what I think is holding Welsh club football outside of the major metropolitan areas back is their isolation, for one, and the fact that at grassroots level, all the way through to semi-pro, it's rugby union. Rugby league doesn't even have a foothold in Wales, but that's I can tell you a lot about the reason why transport links in Wales are naff. You have to go back to 1955 and the British Rail Modernisation Plan and what became known as the Beeching cuts in the 60s. Dr. Beeching, yes, not a transport man, but I mean, he had a doctorate, and we are feeling the effects now in our transport system all these years later, with areas that were railway towns and had good connections to the rest of the country losing their railways and becoming quite isolated, and therefore economically not as well off. And in the last 20 years, we've realised, we shouldn't have done that, because nationalising things and then hacking bits off industry and yeah. I think in order for Welsh football to continue to be where it's at right now and build upon the success of Gareth Bale and Aaron Ramsey, there's some other good young Welsh players that are coming through right now, and to continue to build upon that success, so we have another Ian Rush, for example, in the game, or another, what was the Everton goal? The old Everton goalkeeper. No, like another Neville Southall, another Gary Speed, the late great Gary Speed. They need to definitely improve their grassroots. And it can't just be 5 teams in the English league system. I wouldn't say. I think the ambition is to always aim for the league above. So if you're in the National League, you want to be in League Two. If you're in the League Two, you want to be in League One. League One, Championship, Premier League. Your minimum ambition is to play in the league above, and to get promotion, and to take that next step. You cannot always remain because if you remain content, you don't develop, you don't improve. Players will stop signing for your club because there's no progression, there's no pathway. So there are some clubs that are aware that the non-league or the lower leagues is the level they're at for now, and there's always that you always need ambition to take that next step. Otherwise, you won't be able to sign players. You won't be able to keep developing players because at youth level, other clubs will nick your youth talent because they can offer, a chance to play in Europe or a chance to play in a higher division or whatever. So, yeah, I think stagnation's dangerous. I think it'd be good for them, but that's the club's decision. Places like Bala and Tenby would be good weekend. Yeah, I would assume so, but it's whether they can benefit with the fact that the further up the non-league and hopefully, fingers crossed, the Football League structure they go, the away days get further and further away. And can they financially afford, those away days? Because you've got a budget for that. You've got a budget for the transport costs. Assisting with, can the fans afford it? Because a lot of the areas in Wales are not awash with cash. They're ex-mining towns, they're ex-industrial towns like copper, coal, iron ore. They used to be copper mines, coal mines, iron mines, collieries, that kind of thing. Industrial processing of chemical. A lot of even like Fishguard and Milford Haven, while they've got one of the biggest oil refineries in Western Europe, Pembroke, the money isn't there. Unemployment levels are really high, so you have to, factor that in to whether a community can sustain a club, not only playing in the English league system, but playing in the English professional system. And so, yeah, some clubs just cannot afford to go into the English system because the away days. Because, yes, after a certain level, it does become regional in the non-league, and then taking that next step is like, it's the Southern League rather than the North, and then it's the National League. We have to go to, Gateshead. So if you're playing, let's say, let's go for example, Aberystwyth, Colwyn Bay, and they've got to play a game against Gateshead or Northwich Victoria or Blythe Spartans. That's 6, 7, 8 hours travel by bus, and there's no direct train link. You would have to get multiple. It's ridiculous, and they can't afford. They possibly could afford to get the plane. And yeah, Berwick Rangers have to go to the Scottish system for geographical reasons because they are actually closer to Edinburgh than they are to Newcastle. And they are closer to Edinburgh than Newcastle. That's how big Northumberland is, by the way. And they're on the direct line to Edinburgh and the direct line to Newcastle, but it's quicker to get to Edinburgh. And they're quite isolated geographically. So yeah, there's it, it is what it is. Yeah, but then you could argue Sunderland as well. But no, Newcastle and Sunderland have always been part of the English League structure for, well, as far back as we want to go. And you take Newcastle out of English football. Yeah, it's like taking Rangers and Celtic out of Scottish football. It would have a detrimental impact. And the club's finances would suffer as well with reduced. They would have to, they would make less money. Players are less likely to want to sign there. And they have in recent times had issues signing quality players. Let's not kid ourselves. Could, but that's what it wouldn't wash, because Carlisle, in theory, then you could argue Carlisle United should also play in Scotland, and it's just no, it's not. You could argue, yes, it would make a better league in Scotland, but at the same time, it would devalue the English league massively, because Sunderland and Newcastle have been national champions here and cup champions here and have played in Europe. And taking the the production line of the northeast to English football, you take that out, and therefore, when you talk to a player, like, where do you want to play, the Scottish Premiership or the English Premiership? They're going to go, ooh, let's have a think about that. I can command wages of this high in Scotland because of sustainability, or this high in England because of sustainability. Yeah, they're going to go for England. And it would be like, well, Air United or Stranraer. I wouldn't go that well. Yeah, Gretna. It wouldn't work particularly well. The only reason why Berwick do it is because they are so far north, and at times Berwick historically has been part of Scotland, so there is a more of a cultural link with Berwick upon Tweed, because it was actually once the river was the border. Now the border's a few miles north of Berwick, for whatever reason, I don't know why, but it was actually a border customs point until the Act of Union. It was a border town that had a garrison until the Act of Union in 1705 or 1701. Queen Anne, basically. Act of Union. So we are going that far back. It's not we're only talking, what, 300 years ago. Berwick was a frontier town, which was fought over many, many times. So history, that's like, a few minutes. Obviously, in our lifetimes, that's three and a bit centuries. But in historical terms, that's like 3 minutes. But there is that cultural, same with Gretna. Queen, Queen. Is it Queen's Park or Queen of the South that play in Hampden Park as their home ground? I think it's. Is it? I think it's Queen of the South. Technically, play at Hampden Park. It's technically Gretna and Carlisle. Or what? Something. It's Queen. I know one of them played in Hampden Park, and then you got Partick as well, the other team from Glasgow that everyone forgets about. Yeah, the weirdest home ground in professional football was like when Tottenham were playing at Wembley. It was just like, what? But there's reasons why they play at Hampden. It's just bizarre that it's still a thing today, but it's their thing. They are Hampden is their home ground, which is just a fun fact. Well, no, Croydon would be playing at Palace or Charlton would make more sense for Croydon. It would be like Barnet playing at Wembley. Would be a more apt, comparison. But there's a reason why I don't wear the headset often. It gets quite uncomfortable on live stream to continue wearing it. It does hurt after a But yeah, no, yeah, well, they've got to pay the Scottish FA like a rental fee because the Scottish FA obviously have refurbished Hampden Park, and that in itself is like when we rebuilt Wembley. The FA they have to make the money back, and Scottish football doesn't really have the cash. So yeah, there is that debate about should they should Queen's Park downsize. Arsenal could play at Wembley. I mean, they've moved before. Yes, they've played there before as well. Yes, you could argue that, but the Emirates is now their new home. It's actually quite a nice stadium to look at from getting the train north out of King's Cross. But I think they've lost something since they left Highbury, and it doesn't quite feel the same. Queen of the South, yeah, I can definitely look at Queen of the South. I can look at Weiss and Johnston, who play in Perth. Coulson Johnston, Heart of Midlothian. Midlothian obviously is the region of Scotland, the historical county that they play, where Edinburgh obviously sits. But why they're called Hearts, Heart of Midlothian. Hibernian is basically Hibs. Hibernian is the Latin name for Scotland and the Scottish, one of the Scottish Pictish tribes, and that came over from Ireland. And Ireland being Catholic, Hibernian is the Catholic club of Leith, which was a separate town, which is now a working class suburb of Edinburgh. So Hibernian are the Edinburgh version of Celtic. There you go. Rangers is an interesting one. I've done a bit of coverage on the Scottish league system in the past, and I've got a lot of subscribers from Scotland who subscribe to the channel, and we're talking about all clubs pretty much in the Scottish system have subscribed to the channel at various points, which is fun because every single one of them has called out sectarianism and is highly critical of both Rangers, Celtic, Hibs, Hearts, Motherwell, various fan bases for the sectarian issues historically. Leyton Orient used to play in Clapham. They were called Clapham Orient. Arsenal used to play in Woolwich. And Millwall are still roughly in the same area of London. They've just moved a little bit. But they're still in the Docklands area. They're just not in the same bit of the Docklands area, if that makes sense. That's basically it. But yes, Leyton Orient originally used to play in Clapham. And Arsenal used to play in Woolwich. That's not, yeah. No, I think no. I've watched a fair few Millwall games. They regularly get their FA Cup games on TV for some reason, unfortunately, there's enough of a minority in that fan base that's big enough that causes problems quite regularly. That unfortunately, too often with Millwall, it's their fans, I say fans loosely, the misbehaviour of those who claim to follow the team. That unfortunately damages an already weak reputation for the club further. And if you imagine Millwall being in the Premier League, oh my God, that would be a nightmare for policing. I can see if that was to happen, a lot of partial or full stadium closures as punishment. And at some point, with crowd disorder, they've got to start punishing the clubs, because then the mainstream fans, those fans that do behave, will start going, enough of this. Because if they start staying away when there isn't a stadium partial or full closure, the club owners will be like, this is a problem. then action will start being taken. And if they do that, then West Ham and Millwall can both say, well, you're now singling us out for special treatment when, like, Leeds Man United carries a lot of trouble. Hypothetically, if Southampton and Portsmouth are in the same league, or Blackburn Burnley, in theory, Blackburn Burnley should be behind closed doors then, because there was one match when we got promoted back to the Premier League back in the early 2000s. Mark Hughes was involved with a clash with the Burnley goalkeeper, who Janssen, I think his name was, or Franson, I can't, or Jensen, the former Burnley keeper, Danish keeper, and it led to well, let's just say 562 people were arrested. And that part of Lancashire was a bit of a no-go area for 48 hours. There was disorder and issues all the way from Blackburn, Accrington, Darwin, and Burnley. That part of Lancashire got a bit tasty for a few days, and there was a lot of disorder before the game, during the game, and after the game. There was an FA Cup game he played when Robbie Savage was playing for the side in the mid-2000s, where, again, there was missiles thrown, there was disorder, there was unsavoury scenes. And there was a Premier League game, a couple of Premier League games we obviously played, because we were obviously in the Premier League at the same time for a couple of seasons. And again, I'm going to say, some not very pleasant behaviour was exhibited. And if Millwall West Ham is behind closed doors, then you're basically saying, Liverpool Man United should be behind closed doors permanently, or Blackburn Burnley, or Newcastle Sunderland, Bristol Rovers Bristol City, if they were ever in the same league at the same time again, hypothetically. Arsenal Tottenham. You're basically then suggesting that rivalry matches should basically be, behind closed doors. They're the matches that put bums on seats that fans on TV want to watch as well. Can you imagine the amount of viewers who would tune in, who are neutrals, who don't give a toss about West Ham or Millwall, going to go, let's see what happens in this game? Because on the pitch it will be nasty, off the field it will be nasty, but people want to pay to see that. Yet the league goes, it's a bad image for families, and trying to sell the game. No, can you imagine the American audience going, oh, this is passionate, this is different? You don't get that in the US, when the fan bases are more violent than the violent sport. Can you imagine if, hypothetically, let's go ice hockey, the NHL, if the fans were as violent as the sport is, and that violence is legalised in the sport? Can you imagine the response from the TV audience alone? If they're watching for, they will tune in because it's so shocking and entertaining at the same time. Birmingham City, Aston Villa, or West Brom, Aston Villa, or West Brom, Birmingham, or Aston Villa, Wolves, or if Walsall got one of the other, if Walsall got Aston Villa or West Brom in a cup, that would be a bloodbath. I think, but that's what sells the game. That's what sells the game. Hamburg, Bremen. Lille and Lens in northeastern France. That's oh god, RC Lens versus ROSC Lille. Jesus Christ. Auxerre Strasbourg. These are, ironically, and Saint Etienne Strasbourg even, these are stupidly nasty, dangerous. At no point have UEFA gone, or domestically gone, these matches must be played permanently behind closed doors. because deep down, the authorities know this shit sells. This shit makes money. It always has, always will. The Americans are learning how much European fans hate each other. Yes, they're learning. They will learn. Imagine if we can get St Helens in the FA Cup. God. Well, St Helens don't have a football club, but okay. They're just Scousers. They got lost on the way to Manchester, pissed one day, and thought, "Oh, we're actually quite good at this violence. The ball's a different shape. Let's play." But no, jokes aside, I can't see the Premier League are going to be like, "Oh, we've got to protect our family image," but in reality, come on, deep down they're going to be like, "Nah, this is going to make us a hell of a lot of money." People are going to tune in from all over the world when they realise if they upsell the rivalry, which they should do. Imagine like the amount of interest that will create. People nationally will be going down the pub to watch that, and they won't even care that it's Millwall West Ham. The only reason they'll care, they won't care that their club ain't involved. It's Millwall West Ham. They want to see Millwall West Ham hurt each other on and off the field. And let that sink in. The authorities will claim they were like, "Oh, behave," but in reality, they want the clubs to misbehave. They want the aggro because it actually sells. It'll be the mainstream media, like the newspapers. "Oh, this is a shame of the game," blah, blah, blah. But in reality, it's selling newspapers. It's getting clicks online. It's getting articles read. It's making the news. People are watching, and therefore, actually, it's making the mainstream media a lot of money. A lot of money. But there has to come a point though where, like, no, St Helens is a rugby league town. Weird that the Northwest is the hotbed of English football. The West Midlands and the Northwest. Yeah, there are pockets where football barely exists, like St Helens. It's mad. But then there's other pockets where rugby league don't exist yet. Rugby league is the Northerners' professional sport. It seems the UAE T20 League will go ahead next year and will pull players and fans away from the big, the BBL. Again, we'll see what happens. The UAE obviously want to get test status, so the more they can say, "Look, we can host these big cricket tournaments. We're developing players. The quality's improving." They want to push for test status, and they want to be more than just a T20 one-day international location. They want to be a test side. They themselves, the infrastructure, has hosted test matches, basically Pakistan and Afghanistan not being able to play at home, and that's basically the way you're going. We want to be a test nation, and I think they deserve the right to be a test nation. And it shows the growth of the game globally. That another country wants to drive for test status and a higher standing within the game. Our snooker's got a lot more problems than is the tournament too long or too short. Snooker's got far bigger problems than that. Match fixing and corruption is a far bigger issue than the length of a tournament. That's personal opinion. That's my personal opinion in regards to snooker. It's got far bigger issues to deal with, and it is generally to do with corruption and match fixing, and that is the bigger issue right now, in my personal opinion, that they need to combat, and they're not doing a very good job. Also, on a playing standpoint, the speed of the game. They need to introduce rules to speed up the game. Because Mark Selby, I love the guy. He is a winner. But there are times where he will deliberately slow the play down to, I'd rather watch, paint dry, be more interesting. John Higgins, he's a player I don't like very much. And he actually accepted that he did take bribes, but then he gets really crappy with the media when they ask about, okay, then, you squeaky clean, but you admitted you took bribes. Why John Higgins is still allowed to play snooker after pretty much admitting that he took dirty money to throw frames and matches is beyond me. When Stephen Lee got banned for 10 years for doing exactly the same thing, basically banned for life, only I think 4 years ago, so we still got 6 years of his ban to go. Can someone please explain to me how John Higgins and Maguire are still playing and not suspended, please? It doesn't matter. In my eyes, it doesn't matter. How the fuck is he still playing without a ban? That should be a life ban. He admitted to taking payments to throw matches. Whether he did or not is another thing. He admitted to basically, undermining the sport's integrity. And technically, he broke the law as well, because that is technically fraud to affect, he's basically stolen from the betting companies to, match fixing is a criminal offence. He took bribes to fix, deliberately drop frames and fix matches. It doesn't matter. It does not matter, in my opinion. Maguire and Higgins have both been implicated in match fixing. Stephen Lee was a champion at various ranking and non-ranking events. He got a 10-year ban. He was a high-profile player. Maybe not as good as John Higgins or as successful in the sport as John Higgins for, world championship status. But nah, that's where snooker, in my eyes, is not doing enough to combat corruption. It doesn't matter the nationality or the status of the player. Quintin Hann, yes, I do. Not very memorable player, not very good player, but he was quite a good player, but not world championship caliber status, like world champion status. But I do remember Quintin Hann. He just the name was quite memorable. Quintin, that's quite a memorable name. I remember him from the 90s and the 2000s, like Marco Fu, Doherty, a few flash in the pan players who were at the top for a very short time. But no, in my opinion, going back to John Higgins and Maguire, they should be banned for life. They haven't technically, in my eyes, redeemed themselves. And when John Higgins basically admitted on the record to taking bribes, I'm sorry, that's that, in my opinion, is game over. I don't give a fuck what your status is within a sport. It doesn't matter. Oh, he regularly brought, I think, various actions, statements. It's bringing the game into disrepute when by making a hand gesture or saying something or deliberately distracting an opponent. And then there's, I'm taking tens of thousands of pounds to deliberately throw frames and matches for financial gain for illegal organised crime and betting syndicates. Oh, that smashed the red off the break. That's fine. In my opinion, it's within the rule. It's in the rules. He's done an official break. At least 2 balls have hit a cushion, and he's scattered them. And if a ball goes in off the break, that's technically not against the rules. That's completely different to taking £38,000 in bribes to throw matches. Sorry, that's completely different. What John Higgins admitted to doing is completely different. Oh, fuck the commentators. Fuck John Virgo and Willie Thorne, the late, great Willie Thorne. Because they played the game differently, doesn't mean that shot wasn't a legal shot. He's not broken any rules. He may have broken the code of the unwritten. No, that's where the game needs to modernise. But doing that is completely different to what John Higgins admitted doing. I'll let him. I couldn't care what Clive Everton. No, doesn't matter. Modernise or die. Evolve or die. It's called evolution of the sport. The sport had to evolve, and this is one of the. This is where the Hearns got it right. They were like, the sport needs to evolve or die. Now, Quintin Hahn at the time, if he's playing now, that's the crowd's loving that. The sport needed to evolve, or it would have died itself, died a death of 1,000 cuts. The difference being, I don't have a problem with Quintin Hahn doing that. The problem I have is John Higgins still playing without a suspension. Because it's actually very, very hard to get it done right without actually screwing up, fouling, and then costing yourself the frame and the opponent seizing control of the match. It's very, very hard to do that accurately every single time with the size of the table and the angles of the pockets from where the reds and the black are set up. It's very, very hard. It's almost fluky to snooker your opponent or get the white ball safe or not leave a pot on. Very, very difficult. And the only players I could see doing that are Neil Robinson, Judd Trump, and maybe Ronnie O'Sullivan if he's in one of those moods where, I like it when players decide to throw tradition out the window a little bit and go, you know what, I'm just going to leather it and see what happens. Because the sport always needs to adapt, evolve, change, modernise, and that's a good thing. But comparing what Quintin Hahn did with smashing it off the break and being a little bit of a rebel to what John Higgins and Stephen Lee did. Stephen Lee, got done for match fixing. John Higgins was implicated and actually admitted taking bribes. That is a complete difference. And in my opinion, I am actually disgusted. This is one of the reasons why I stopped watching snooker, is because players were implicated, accused of, and these allegations against Higgins haven't gone away. They continue to crop up. That he's still willing to, dip his hand in the company ink, so to speak. Take dirty money, and until the sport weans itself off the sports betting companies and sponsors. Yes, I know the tobacco sponsorship back in the day. Obviously, you wouldn't have that now because the ban on tobacco sponsorship. But until the sport is willing to go, you know what, we'll go with a car company, we'll go with an insurance company, we'll go with a confectioner, like a chocolatier, a sweet company, we'll go with a shoe brand. Until the sport weans itself off the need for the players and the competitions to be sponsored by gambling companies, until that actually happens, and there's that, we're breaking with this now, because every sport that has a betting company as a sponsor, be it of a tournament or of an individual athlete or of a team, the background of match fixing, spot fixing, corruption is there. Now, I'm not saying that the gambling companies are wrong or bad. They're actually one of the most regulated industries in the world, is the gambling industry. But where the regulated industry goes, the black market, the criminal, unregulated goes with it. And unfortunately, there is, in my mind, a concern there. Now, it's so interesting because gambling is illegal in let's say Muslim countries, for example. Yet, so many European clubs and leagues have gambling sponsors of teams and leagues and competitions like Ladbrokes, Sky Bet, Bet365. And with the World Cup going to Qatar, that's going to be such a difficult conversation to have because it's illegal. You get a nice hefty prison sentence over there for gambling. Will Ronnie O'Sullivan surpass Stephen Hendry's 7 world titles? Depends how long Ronnie O'Sullivan wants to keep playing. And he's retired twice before, remember that. And so Stephen Hendry retired once before. They both come out of retirement. It depends how long Ronnie O'Sullivan wants to keep playing, and whether his mindset's in the right place. Because Ronnie O'Sullivan is a loose cannon, away from the table, and away from even in tournaments and away from tournaments. He's a loose cannon. He's unpredictable. He's a very feisty personality. He's a controversial figure. He's chalk and cheese for a lot of people. He's a brilliant player, but he rubs people up the wrong way sometimes, and it's a difficult one. Gambling is technically it's now federally legal to gamble outside of the state of Nevada and the casinos and Atlantic City. It's up to state legislatures, apart from the state lotteries, to sanction more casinos outside of Indian reservations, for example, and more casino resorts, and give gambling licenses to companies like Ladbrokes and Bet365 and Sportsbet, and the gambling firms, be it the British companies like William Hill and Ladbrokes, do have a global presence. And so do the Australian and gambling firms as well. And so technically, federally, it's legal. What do I classify? An event that requires you to go professional, or has the option where you can have semi-pro, amateur, or professional status, and has a governing body. So, if a hobby or a game has a governing body and has sponsorship and the ability to win prize money for said hobby or game, so croquet I would class as a sport because you can win prize money for playing croquet tournaments. It's an activity where 2 or more people compete against each other at the same time in a discipline or an event where the winner is awarded a trophy and the loser may get a secondary trophy or an award, and there is prize money at stake. So whether you are amateur, semi-professional, professional, it's a difficult definition of what's classed as a pastime, a hobby, or a sport. It has to be organised. There has to be an organised structure to what is participated, so a league or a governing body or events you qualify for. So the Gaelic Amateur Association covers hurling and Gaelic football. There are organised leagues for hurling and Gaelic football. There's a governing body, the GAA. They play, in an organised fashion over a season. So a competition window, and rules have been written down for I think a couple hundred years now when it comes to the Gaelic Amateur Association sports. but they are classed as amateur. So therefore, officially, it cannot be your main income earner as the player. Unofficially it is, but officially it's not your main income earner. Professional status means that is now your job. Will Usain records ever get broken? Out of the 10 fastest times, he's the only one to run clean. So out of all the sub 10 second times that have ever been, I think 9.7 or whatever, the top 10 fastest, the only ones that have been run clean have been run by Usain Bolt. Out of the top times that have ever been run clean, or the athlete who has never tested positive for any banned substance is Usain Bolt. He isn't a genetic freak. He is one of the most tested athletes in history. If he was using a banned substance, he had a very good masking agent, or the substance was a banned substance at the time. And you can put in freedom of information requests for his test results. Because the London Olympics was hosted in the UK, so the UK anti-doping was alongside World Anti-Doping was the two doping agencies involved in that Olympics, and you can put in a freedom of information request in. Because predominantly the sports that are at the Olympics generally are still amateur for predominant participation. And those sports that are professional have special rules put in place where they limit the amount of either there's an age restriction, so football, only 2 or 3 overage players are allowed in a squad. Rugby, it cannot be the full 15 aside, it has to be sevens. Golf is a changed, slightly different format. So those sports that are actually got professional status, have to have certain rule changes, for example, to get Olympic participation. So there you go. How has Nadal won 14 French Opens? Because he's a clay specialist. He's the best clay court player of all time. And in Spain, they play on clay as well. So he was brought up on the surface. He perfected the technique on the clay surface, and his style of play suits clay as well, which is ridiculous. But he's also won the most majors, so it's not only the French Open that he's won a lot, he's won all the others as well. So I think he's one of the few players to hold all 4 in the same calendar year. So he did that before Djokovic, I think. He did that before, I think he's done it before Federer. Murray has never done it. He is the best of all time. By some margin. I think he's better than Djokovic. He's a more likable character than Djokovic as well. Djokovic is not an overly likable character. He doesn't, yeah. But that again, that's personal opinion. You can just, yeah. Federer. Federer's only got a couple of years on Nadal. He's only like 3-4 years older than Nadal. And away from grass, Federer has not got the same, level of success as Nadal has, or Djokovic. So you could argue that Federer's Mr. Wimbledon, but he's not, and he is the ultimate gentleman. But I think Federer's played 4 or 5 years too long, whereas Nadal, if Nadal's condition in regards to the degenerative condition of the bones and joints from his ankles and feet continues, that could be the last time he plays the French Open. That could be the last time we see him. All depends if he plays Wimbledon or not. If he decides to play Wimbledon, he will retire at the end of the year. I think Nadal's health his body's breaking down. I think Federer retires as well. Djokovic, on the other hand, with what happened with Australia and the Australian Open, I think Djokovic might decide, you know what, this could become problematic. Not being able to do all 4 Grand Slams anymore. Well, Murray hasn't got long left either. Del Potro's gone, one of the few guys who could challenge them. I think Cilic is probably the next dominant guy who's going to win, a spate of Grand Slams. I think Cilic is Medvedev. There's a couple, but there's that Italian guy who's quite good on clay. I think it will actually probably make it better, having a bit more open. Anyone, I think it'll probably actually benefit having multiple players competing for the Grand Slams rather than just a handful every time, because it does get a little bit. Oh, it's one of these 3 or 4 or 5 that's going to, like Stan Wawrinka as well. It sort of is not as enjoyable. It's kind of cool having lots of names in contention, and then that will actually improve the competitiveness level, I think. My thoughts on this new golf that Greg Norman, money's ruined the sport, as simple as, and it's dirty money. But then the PGA has been taking Saudi money for years, so it just dirty money. And these are players that have already, got a lot of cash. It's not a good look when younger kids are not taking up the sport, and viewership. Apparently, golf's going from strength to strength. I don't know where they got that from. It really hasn't. You put it behind a paywall, it's actually got lower viewership figures now than it's ever had. People are switching off the sport and have done for the last 10 or so years. They risk alienating more fans at a time when sports fans in general, people in general, have less money in their pockets. They're struggling to make ends meet. The obscene amounts of money involved, it's going to alienate a lot of working people. That's the golf is the PGA, the European players, the European Tour is a mess. The American Tour has been greedy for too long. But in this case, the players are being too greedy now, and it's not a good PR look when it's greed versus greed. It's kind of troubling for me, the timing of it, considering the average person, how much. But yeah, putting behind a paywall hasn't helped the sports image and appeal to a wider audience. Apart from my late grandfather and myself, there was no one in my family that really took golf of any interest, and in recent years I stopped caring about it completely, and I stopped watching altogether. I used to love staying up watching Augusta as a kid. That was a special treat as well. That was a very special treat. I was allowed to watch. And back in the day, obviously on British TV, had all 4 days play. Was free to air. And then they started scaling back, and that's the Open and the Augusta. They were the ones to be allowed to watch the Augusta National and stay up late, and watch was a special treat in my household. But because I was addicted to sport as a kid, that was a very special treat to be allowed to watch the Green Jacket. And when Nick Faldo won it, that was a big thing for British sport at the time. And because Nick Faldo, ironically, is actually local to the area I live in. He only lives down the road. He only lives in Wentworth, which is in Surrey, which is about 8.5 miles from where I live right now. And that Yeah, so he is actually local to where I live, and you see him out and about around Virginia Water and Sunningdale and Ascot, doing his shopping and stuff. But yeah, when they started putting the paywalls up and selling, the Opens come off free to wear, the Augusta National, the Ryder Cup, you kill off your potential new fan base, because accessibility is key to any sport. And yeah, no, I lost. I fell out of love very, very quickly when the powers that be got too greedy. Do I like the Ryder Cup? It's a different format. But not really. I've never really been sold on the Ryder Cup. It's like I've never been sold on the Davis Cup either in tennis, or the FedEx Cup for the women in tennis. I've never been sold on that as a format. I understand originally it was the UK versus America for the Ryder Cup, and then obviously it became Europe versus America the Ryder Cup. But the Sondheim Cup for the women, I never really enjoyed it. Because you have to tweak. It's a different set of rules for like how they score it, and that's team match play is not something I enjoyed playing when I was younger. I don't like match play golf. I like, you're golfing when you play with your friends, you're playing against your friends. When you enter a competition as an amateur or down the local golf club, you're playing against the guy who's your playing partner. You want to be under par or have less of an over par than your opposition. When I was at school, we had obviously golf competitions. You want to be, you're playing against everyone else. I don't like pairs match play or team match play. It's the format. Yeah, not sold it. Is every 2 years too frequent? I wouldn't say it's too frequent necessarily, but you've got to fit it in with the other golf tournaments and the majors, and on a cycle, because now golf is an Olympic sport as well. You have to fit that in the Olympic cycle as well. So there are some other considerations, and of course you've got played in Europe, played in America, played in Europe, played in America. You've got to work with the golf courses, so your venues. It's like when you bid for the Super Bowl, or bid for a World Cup or a Euros. There needs to be some preparation put in place. How many fans will you be accommodating? What improve? It gives the course owners or the course designers time to prepare or make adjustments to the course, like the Wentworth Links, for example. Which Wentworth course? Because there's 4 courses at Wentworth, for example. Which course will they be using? How many fans will they be expecting? Where are they going to put the TV? Where's the camera angles on the first fairway, the 17th, the 6th, whatever. Is there a specific? Are we going to move the bunkers? Are they going to move the water hazards? Are we going to have to redesign a section of this fairway onto the green approach? So, do we move the pin, which is the flag where you putt the golf ball? A whole range of things go into consideration. So there'll be several. They'll be doing test events where they'll be doing an amateur competition where they or that course will host a competition, like a lower ranking competition or a non-ranking competition, just so they can practice with the layout they want to use. So there'll be a test, like a test tournament, like the Confederations Cup in football, a test event. Yes, Michael Donop winning his 20th, and 3 fatalities this year in the Isle of Man, 1 in the sidecar and 2 in the I think 1 in the super stock and 1 in the superbike race. There were 3 fatalities this year, which is actually quite high. The average is just over 1 a year. To have 3 is worrying. Why do they scrap it? Because it didn't really. Well, firstly, at the time of year they were playing Qatar and COVID. I think it will return for the US, Canada, and Mexico tournament. I think COVID. They suspended it because of COVID. I don't know. I think did they have it for Russia? I don't think they had it for Russia, did they? It wasn't making FIFA enough money. It's all about money. It wasn't. It was a great little tournament format. It was a good test event as well to test how. I think they did have it for Russia. I think COVID was the reason, and the venues wouldn't be ready. It just wouldn't work for Qatar. Um, I like the Confederations Cup because that's a good warm up tournament and a good test event to see how the organisers are going to cope with an international tournament. Admittedly, it's smaller, but it's also a good time to experiment with new technology, new rules, test the venues. You get a good idea of the playing conditions. I liked it. I liked it. It was the best teams in each confederation playing each other. So you did see some weird matchups because not all those teams would have qualified for the World Cup necessarily, and you did see some really good matchups. I'm not gonna lie, it was actually kind of fun to see the matchups that were on the field. Yeah, let's not talk about Mark Vivian Foe and what happened because that's a dark day for professional sport. You don't want to see that. And we nearly had that with Mwamba and Christian Eriksen and Daley Blint has got similar health issues. It's not. Yeah, that's the Confederations Cup didn't take place in 2003. That was the Africa Cup of Nations. The Confederations Cup is the year before a World Cup, not the year after. But Mark Vivian Foe was definitely uh, a low point. Absolutely. It's I, yeah, I do miss the Confederations Cup. A lesser ranking international tournament, but still one that I think has a place in the international calendar because nations want to win that. You prove then you really are the best in the world at that time because you've got to compete against all the confederation champions from FIFA, CONMEBOL, CONCACAF, Oceania, the Asian Federation, the AFCON. You've got to compete against, the best at that time in the world. That's your qualification status, is to be either the World Cup or Euros hosts, depending on the cycle, or African hosts, whatever the cycle may be, how they figure it out, and or the the hosts of a tournament, and or the winners of the various confederations around the world. So yes, you are playing against the informed teams at that moment in that calendar year or the last 2 calendar years, and it was a different challenge because you're not playing against you wouldn't have 2 European. You'll have a European team versus an African team, which in the final, which I think South Africa 2009 were in the final and they won, and Spain didn't win. Yet Spain went on to win the World Cup the following year. I think 2005 Argentina played because the World Cup holders used to qualify as well. So that would be Brazil, and Brazil also won the South American Confederation leading into that, and Argentina lost the final, and they were the runners up. So they also qualified. Microstates are Luxembourg, biggest population, more talent depth. Luxembourg, I think, would win for me. Yeah, and if it wasn't Australia every year, it was New Zealand, and then Tahiti won it one year, and you're thinking to yourself, what? Yeah, I know. I remember when Tahiti played, but I do miss the Confederations Cup because it's the way you qualify is by actually winning your competition that is in your confederation. So you have to play against the best in your region to get there, which is the ultimate, really. And it was just no Luxembourg. They used to. The definition of a microstate is, I think, then Liechtenstein would be the best microstate. Again, in my opinion, they'll be Liechtenstein then, because they've got Olympic medalists and they've had players playing Champions League games. So there you go. If we're talking about a microstate World Cup, it'd be Liechtenstein, because Luxembourg competes in the less than million population Olympics, because there is a international event where the nations in the world that have less than 1 million inhabitants compete in their own mini Olympics in all the Olympic sports, and Luxembourg regularly came out on the top of that. So then they were thrown out. Then I think it'd be Liechtenstein. No, Luxembourg aren't too bad. Neither are Liechtenstein. They're far ahead the other smaller population-sized nations by quite some distance. Because it's not just football that they're good at. They have other athletes like in cycling in Luxembourg, and the winter sports in Liechtenstein by quite some margin, who are pretty decent. Yeah, so. And they've had world champions and Olympic, and Tour de France, golden, yellow jersey winners and young Ryder of the Year, polka dot. Iceland have always, though, managed to produce top quality athletes because they are a very healthy nation. Ødegaard Johnsen, for example, they constantly produce strong men, world's strongest men. They've had about 4 or 5 of them, and when you got Ødegaard Johnsen and players of that ilk, coming out of a nation that's got less than 350,000 people. Yeah, I wouldn't say that Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia are pretty poor. It's just that Latvia have only qualified for the one tournament, and then the others haven't. But there's some decent. I mean, Marian Pahars coming out of Latvia, and Estonia with Mark Poom. There's your best players out of those countries. Lithuania. Again, it's because the end of the Soviet Union, the state funding and the infrastructure just dropped off a cliff, and when you lose that backing, and with a small population base and only a handful of big urban areas and not a lot of corporate money, it's a problem. And when ice hockey in Latvia, and ice hockey though is their national sport. When ice hockey is your national sport by some margin for participation, where that's where the money goes into Dinamo Riga, which used to play in the KHL, and the Latvian domestic and Lithuanian domestic leagues are quite good, and then the Estonian system is linked to Finland. That tells you all you need to know when your national sport is not football. That's why the quality is low. There's an interest in a different sport where there is more interest, more participation, and higher quality as a result. It's a no-brainer at that point. And Latvian players play in the NHL at a high level, and they're in the top level of the World Championships. They go to the Olympics. Yeah, there's your answer in that regard. And yeah, the Soviet Union was a solid nation, and of course you've got Spartak Moscow, and Dinamo Moscow, and Red Star Moscow, and CSKA, and SKA, and Torpedo Moscow. I could go on. Zenit St. Petersburg. It's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous, but yes. And yeah, population size and the lack of corporate money, the lack of big name sponsors to sponsor domestic leagues, the lack of stadium infrastructure, the fact that sports fans in those countries are more interested in ice hockey than football, and boxing, and you're trying to compete with other sports that have more interest and rallying as well in those countries. Tightly controlled, very tightly controlled. Back in the day, it was very state managed, very very managed and controlled and heavily regulated. Not a particularly nice experience, no. Anyway, look, I'm going to have to call it a day because I've got to organise things of tomorrow. I really appreciate it. Of course, State of Origin Game 1 is tomorrow. So when I get in from work, literally, I'm going straight watching the full replay because I will be not able to watch it live because I'll be working. So I'll watch State of Origin Game 1. Really interesting with the amount of debutants and both sides not necessarily putting their strongest lineups out because players are out of form, players are injured. So it'd be interesting to see how those matchups work and how the new faces for both sides, how they play. There's some players like Harry Grant going into State of Origin under injury cloud. Jack Whiten is not playing the 14 role. He's all in the halves or at fullback. He's playing in the centres. At left centre, Tony Staggs makes his debut. Cobbo on the wing for Queensland. Tupou over Edo Carr for New South Wales. No Travojevic at all. Because two are injured and one's just out of form. So there's no Travojevic brother for the New South Wales squad. Jake is not selected. Ben and Tom are injured. There's no Latrell Mitchell. So both starting centres from last year's State of Origin series are not playing for New South Wales. And there's a lot of question marks over Billy Slater as coach because it's his first Origin game. It's gonna be fun. It's going to be fun, and we'll see what happens. But anyway, thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate all the questions. Really appreciate it. And I'll have some more content for you very, very, very soon.